Welcome back, Misfits. Welcome back to a new episode. Today we're going to talk about to do or not to do. Today we're going to talk about obedience, disobedience, and generational blessings. The way this episode is structured is we're going to give you some Bible with examples of people that obeyed, disobeyed, and received generational blessings from God. We're going to give you 3 examples for each category. And then the first category that we're going to start with is obedience.
Yeah, so we're going to do obedience first. The first example we have is Noah and Noah's Ark. And so just background comes straight from the Bible. This is Genesis 6 and verse 9. It says, "This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on earth at the time, and he walked in close fellowship with God." So during this time that Noah was alive, people had gone really rowdy, real corrupt, very violent, just a lot of disobedience, a lot of stuff going on in the world, that God called Noah for this reason and was like, we need to kind of fix this, right? And so it goes on in verse 13. So God said to Noah, "I have decided to destroy all living creatures, for they have filled the earth with violence. Yes, I will wipe them all out along with the earth." And then he tells them, "Build a large boat from cypress wood, waterproof it with tar inside and out." And he goes on, he tells them exactly how tall, how wide, all that kind of stuff.
Specific, yes.
Very specific. And so he continues on and tells them in verse 17, "Look, I am about to cover the earth with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die, but I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring a pair of every kind of animal, a male and a female." So Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. So Noah obeys. He's like, "Yes, Lord, every step that you give me, every detail, I will do it." So he must seem like a crazy person, because that we know of in the Bible hadn't talked about rain, about God ever doing anything like this. But he never doubted. He was just faithful, and he did just as God had told him. So, as you know, the flood did come, and it rained for 40 days, 40 nights. And once it was time, Noah just waited for a sign from God to tell him, hey, it's safe, you can come out, everything's fine. And because he was obedient and faithful, God had made a promise to him before all of this. And so he kept that promise. And he told him, I have a covenant, and so I'm affirming that covenant. I'm fulfilling it to bless you, bless your land, and to never bring floodwaters again to destroy the earth. And so we look at Genesis 9, a few verses 8 and 9, and then 11 through 17. It says, "Then God told Noah and his sons, I hereby confirm my covenant with you and your descendants. Yes, I am confirming my covenant with you. Never again will floodwaters kill all living creatures. Never again will a flood destroy the earth. Then God said, I am giving you a sign of my covenant with you and with all living creatures for all generations to come. I have placed my rainbow in the clouds. It is a sign of my covenant with you and with the earth. When I send clouds over the earth, the rainbow will appear in the clouds, and I will remember my covenant with you and with all living creatures. And never again will the floodwaters destroy all life. When I see the rainbow, I will remember the eternal covenant between God and every living creature on earth." Then God said to Noah, "Yes, this rainbow is the sign of the covenant. I am confirming with all the creatures on earth." So basically, it was because Noah did all these things and he was faithful and he was obedient to God. God kept his promises, and then made sure that he was never going to do this again to bring any kind of flood that would destroy the whole earth.
Yeah, just dramatically destroy the whole earth.
Yeah.
This is crazy though, because like you said, the Bible doesn't mention rain before this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if it had never rained before, all of a sudden, God comes to you and he's like, "I'm gonna need you to build this boat," and you're just like, "For what?"
Yeah, it's rain. And he goes, "What's that?"
What's that? Yeah. What does that look like? But he never questioned it. He just did his thing.
Yeah.
And
there
just
is
obedient the whole time.
There is a verse, I think it's in Matthew, where it talks about when he was building it, people pay no attention to him because they're like, we don't know, what is this?
It's a weird hobby.
Yeah, so they just kept on doing, paid no attention to him about what was going on. I'm sure he was like, God told me to do this. And they're like, yeah, okay, Noah. And they just kept on doing their daily things because they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. What's rain?
Yeah, I think this is good too because it as you were reading it, it just made me think that it's also generational blessings because whenever he got in the boat with his family and his kids and his daughter-in-laws and all these things. So that's pretty awesome too. All right, so the next example that we have is going to be Esther and Mordecai. This is from the book of Esther. She has her own book, so just go read that. So a little bit of background. There's a king. His name is King Xerxes, just like in 300, yes, but from the Bible.
Say that 3 times fast, right?
Xerxes. All right, so King Xerxes was looking for a wife because the wife that he had at the time, she was just wilding out and not being obedient to him and not doing what he wanted her to do.
Gave her the boot.
Exactly. So he got rid of her, and they were in the kingdom, and they were just like traveling around trying to find women for him to choose from. And then Esther is one of the women that is in the running to be queen. So it's very pageanty. They go out, they look for all these women, and then they bring them back to the castle or whatever. And they're basically living there, and he's kind of just figuring out which one he wants. Is this The Bachelor?
Not that one.
The Bachelorette. All right, so this is from Esther, and it says, "And the king loved Esther more than any other young woman. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head." So of all the women that were staying in the kingdom and doing the little bachelorette contest, she's the one that wins. And then, so after she's queen, there was a guy, his name is Haman, and he was very power hungry, and King Xerxes gives him some power. And basically after the king gives him a little bit of power, he just feels very high and mighty, and he wants people to bow down to him. So Mordecai, come in the picture, Mordecai. So Mordecai is Esther's cousin, and he refuses to bow down to Haman and show him any sort of reverence because he's like, I just bow down to God. I'm not about to bow down to you. So Haman, being the petty person that he is, he gets offended, and he uses his influence with the king to suggest to him that he should kill all the Jews, right? Because Esther and Mordecai are Jews. So he's like basically saying, this guy won't bow down to me, so I'm going to plot something so they can kill him. So he goes to the king, and he's like, hey, I think we should kill the Jews. And for some reason, King Xerxes is like, yeah, that makes total sense. Let's do that. I'm on board.
Some of these kings.
Yeah, he's like, where do I sign? And then, so what happens is Mordecai tells Esther what's going on, because even though she's the queen, she's not privy to any of this information, so she just doesn't know what's going on.
She also has certain rules she has to follow.
Right, so. She has certain rules. She has to stay in the east wing, and then the king lives on the west wing. It's a whole thing.
Come hither.
Exactly. And she hasn't been called on, and she doesn't know any of these things. So Mordecai tells Esther what's going on. He's like, hey, Haman wants to kill all the Jews, and I need your help, right? Because she's the queen. So he asks her to use her influence to help the Jews, right? And of course, being in the position that she's in, she doesn't necessarily feel super comfortable doing that, right? Because that would mean her going to talk to the king, and the king hasn't called for her, and people die if you just show up in the king's, like, I don't know, royal room or something, and you haven't been called on. So Esther was super hesitant because women didn't get involved and stuff like that, and she had to go talk to the king without him having called on her, and that could get her killed, like I said prior. So chapter 4, verse 13, Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all the Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this? It's one of the best Bible verses ever.
Yeah, that's really good.
It's so powerful because he's basically saying, he's like, God's still going to save us, so you can either be obedient and be a part of it or just not. So after that, she's on board, and she's like, okay, fine. I'll help you. I'll help all of us not get killed.
I guess I want to live.
I guess. So now she's on board, and she plans a dinner. So the way she does this is just very strategic. Yeah, strategic. So she plans a dinner to ask the king not to kill the Jews, right? And there's 3 people at this dinner. There's Esther, there's King Xerxes, and then there's Haman. So at this point, when she plans the dinner, and Esther is a short book, so if you want to read it, please go ahead.
It's full of gems.
Yeah. So Esther gets real savage, and she says, Queen Esther replied, if I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king. Who would do such a thing? King Xerxes demanded.
You.
who would be so presumptuous as to touch you, right? So the king is like, who wants to hurt my queen? Like, that's insane. And then Esther replies, the wicked Haman is sitting at this table, people. So she said, the wicked Haman is our adversary and our enemy. Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. Then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out into the palace garden. Haman, however, stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that the king intended to kill him. In despair, he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king was returning from the palace garden. The king exclaimed, will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes? And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. Now, mind you, King Xerxes is upset, right? Because this man has been plotting to kill his wife and he didn't even know.
Right.
And now he's just, because he's mad, he's just being petty. And he's like, oh, now you want to take advantage of my wife, right?
Yeah.
You want to kill
he's
her.
He's like seeing things
now
that
you want,
aren't
yeah,
even,
exactly. So he was just losing his mind. So then Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, Haman has set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination. Then impale Haman. The king says, then impale Haman on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. So
much happens, and he's like,
it's so dramatic.
The scene, right? Like, you can picture it, like they're
You
having
can,
dinner,
you
and that's
can,
just like,
'cause it just seems
was
so real.
Haman, and then the king just going, like, just having a fit of rage.
It's crazy. And it's important to mention that this sharpened pole that they're talking about, so because Mordecai wouldn't bow to Haman, right? He wanted to kill all the Jews, and he was like, for Mordecai specifically, I want him to die a very specific death. So
like, I'm going to kill all of them, but I want to specifically
this one is going to suffer. Yeah. So I'm going to make this contraption, and I'm going to put it in my garage. And then whenever we start killing the Jews, I'm going to kill this one with this pole. And lo and behold, he got killed on his own pole. It's not funny.
All the irony.
Okay. That's a good story. Please
just
go ahead and read the book of Esther. But we're going to go moving on to our next example.
Moving on. So the next one we're going to share is Daniel in the lion's den. So very popular story. I think most of us have heard part of Daniel's story or some aspect of it, but just a little background. So Daniel was in Babylon as a captive slave because the Israelites had been captured many years ago. So Daniel was about 17 when this happened, and when we pick up the story here, he's now about 70. So he's been there a long time. But during this whole time, he had always been faithful to God, no matter what was going on in this kingdom and being a slave. So he had a lot of favor with the king Darius. And he helped him with a lot of the stuff that he was doing. So, the king liked him. So the king had plans to continue giving him more responsibilities and actually wanted to put Daniel kind of over his entire empire, like to kind of be an overseer kind of thing. And so some of the people that Daniel worked with were not okay with this. Like, they were like, he's a slave, like, he shouldn't kind of have these privileges. So they were jealous, they were mad, they didn't agree with it. And so they were trying to see how they could catch Daniel into doing something like breaking the law or something. And he really didn't have anything except for the fact that he was a very devoted person to God. So he prayed all the time and was very, religious. Like, he kept with his practices. So there wasn't anything that they can really get him on unless they put something like this in place. So they went to the king, and so they kind of appealed to his ego and were like, hey, I think we should get like the people to not pray or bow down to anyone else but you. I think that's a great idea. We'll do it for 30 days. What do you think?
There's always that one person that goes, that's a great idea.
No, like, hey.
That's a great, I completely support what you're saying, even though it's fully deranged.
Yes. And so they're like, just to you. And so the king was like, yeah, I like that. That sounds good. Kind of reminds me a little of the Lot story. Like, hey, anything that kind of benefits me, I'm down for it. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, done. And he signed the decree or whatever. And so we jump into Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. And it says, but when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room. So he just went on doing what he did. He read it. He knew what the law said, the new law said, But he's like, I'm not going to stop.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm not doing that.
That's nice. I'm going to go pray to God.
Thank you for the suggestion. I decline.
And he basically went to pray to God, like, help me with this. Because he's like,
as he should.
As he should. That's what he should have done.
For sure.
So he went with a window open towards Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day. That was like his thing that he did all the time. So just as he'd always done, giving thanks to God. So then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. So they went straight to the king and reminded the king about his law. Did you not sign a law that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except for you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions? Yes, the king replied. That decision stands. It is an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. Then they told the king, that man Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, ignoring you and your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day. So hearing this, the king was deeply troubled. Like he snapped, like he realized, oh, I like Daniel, and I just did this to him. And so he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. He spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of the predicament. So Daniel understood what had happened, but that wasn't going to stop his relationship with God, right? Like he knew this law had been written, but he's like, I need to ask God for help. So Daniel stayed obedient to the point where even though the king was trying to like find a way to help him, he couldn't. So Daniel's obedience even goes beyond him. And so it kind of goes off to the king. Like the king knows that Daniel believes in God and that he prays to God. And so in the next verse it says, so as the king gave orders to Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions, the king said to him, may your God, whom you serve so faithfully, rescue you. So the king, even though he didn't believe, he believed that Daniel believed. Mm-hmm. So because of that, because of his obedience, he gets thrown into, that was his punishment, quote unquote. So he gets thrown into the den of lions. But he was faithful. He didn't resist that. He obeyed God. And crazy enough, it was the king who was the one who was feeling terrible for him. And he was like, what am I going to do? How do I get him out? What's going to happen? He was very worried for him, even though he was like, may your God protect you. And he was like the first one at the den the next day to see, like, I hope he's fine. And of course, Daniel is. Like, God protected him. He was okay. And we go into Daniel, same chapter, verse 20. It says, when he got there, he called out in anguish, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God, whom you serve so faithfully, able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, long live the king. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. So because of his faith, because of his obedience, then the king realized what he had done and kind of his mistake in doing this. And so he made a decree. He said in verse 26, I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his rule will never end. And so that very last verse, he goes on to prosper Daniel. He ends up giving him that extra responsibility, letting him reign over the King Darius's empire after all. So,
which is crazy.
Yeah,
right.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah, he's like, I've seen what your God can do. No, we all gonna serve this God. Yeah. Like he was so obedient, he converted a nation.
He just like went like, not only did he like revert it, but he like went beyond and was like, okay, now we're all gonna obey this God because like he did this. Like, yeah, we're all doing it.
Right. So that's it's awesome. It's a great story.
Yes.
All right, so now we're transitioning into disobedience, and for the first example that we have about disobedience, it's just the Genesis, you know what I mean? So we're gonna talk about Adam and Eve. We're gonna talk about Adam and Eve. All right, so background: first humans, right? First humans on Earth. You should at least know that, people, right? So first humans. So we all know the story in one way or another, right? After creation, God makes man, and then it's like, let's not leave him alone. He needs a woman. So he does the thing. He takes out the rib and does the whole thing. So he gives simple and clear instructions about being free to eat from any tree So he creates Adam, he creates Eve, and then he's like, all right, be fruitful and multiply. Do what you do, right? But he's specific to say, you can do anything except eat from this particular tree.
Just the one.
Just the one tree. It was Eden, right? It was a whole garden. It was probably massive. Just don't eat from this tree. What type of tree was it? I don't know. All right, so it's the Bible, and the Bible says, but the Lord God warned him, you may freely eat the fruit of every tree in the garden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you eat its fruit, you are sure to die. Right? Very, very specific. Very, because
a very good reason.
Yeah, God is specific. All right. So sadly, maybe you don't know how the story ends, but sadly, they did not keep to God's word and did not obey. They were tricked by the serpent when it told Eve that they wouldn't really die, but they would be like God. Right? So you're like, have some of this fruit. It's probably pretty good. Right. God didn't say you would die.
No, you're just going to be like him.
You're going to be,
be a bad
that
thing.
Cannot be a bad thing. So go ahead and eat from this tree.
Yeah.
All right. Bible says, God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. The woman, Eve, was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it too. At that moment, their eyes were opened, and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. There's a lot going on here. Okay? Right? Number one, the fruit looked good, right? Granted, I'll give you that. Great. But then the verse tells us not only did the fruit look good, she also wanted what the serpent was telling her, right? She wanted the wisdom. She's like, oh, this is going to make me better. It's going to make me like God. She proceeds to eat the fruit. And then she gives it to her husband. Come try this.
Which, by the way, it sounds like he was there all along.
Yeah,
you know,
he was just standing there.
She was the one having the conversation, but he was there. He heard.
He probably could have stopped it.
Yeah, but
so let's stop blaming us women because he probably could have said something.
Because he heard it and he took it. Why? Because he probably believed it too. He was like, "Oh, that sounds pretty good. Actually, you're doing it. Okay, I'm doing it."
Yes, and particularly about this verse, and this has nothing to do with this podcast right now, but last week's sermon at church when they said they sewed fig leaves together, I was like, man. That must have taken some time.
Yeah.
You know? Do you have string? Like, how do you
That's
do it?
Interesting.
You know?
Yeah.
I really deep dived into that. And I was like, I wonder how they sewed these fig leaves
together. Did they
together
grab a sheep and
exactly,
do some kind of
like
maneuvering?
how long does this take? You
some
know?
MacGyvering.
It's just interesting to think about. All right, back to the story. Back to the actual podcast. Now God comes looking for them, right? So after they eat the fruit, Eve got the fruit. She gave it to Adam. Adam ate the fruit. So now God comes looking for them, but they're ashamed, so they hide. They made excuses and blamed each other.
It was her. No,
yeah,
it was
you. It was this woman you gave me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So God knew God knew what they had done.
Yeah.
And because of their disobedience, this is what happens next. Then the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all animals, domestic and wild. You will crawl on your belly, groveling in the dust as long as you live. I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. Then he said to the woman, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth. Let's just stop right there and think about how, if this hadn't happened, maybe
we were just talking about
this, how maybe you could have birth with no pain.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Just be like, poop, there's a baby.
That's crazy. Oh my god, the joy. That's crazy to think about. Then he said to the woman, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth, and you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. And to the man he said, since you listened to your wife and ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. It will grow thorns and thistles for you, though you will eat of its grains. By the sweat of your brow you will have food to eat until you return to the ground from which you were made. For you were made from dust, and to dust you will return. Man.
That's another point, too. Like, we probably wouldn't have to work so hard to have stuff. Because God would just give us all the stuff.
Yeah.
He gave them all the stuff, but, you know.
Yeah.
Now we have to work for it.
I mean, these verses, they all sound bad.
Yeah.
But if I could just have the no birth without the pain, like, that's all we need, you know?
Yeah.
You know?
That's true.
This is the conversation where everyone's like, it was Eve's fault. But Adam didn't have to eat it.
Sorry, it's both.
You know? Yeah. Men could have been more holy, but you ate it too. All right. So a teaching moment here is that even with all of these things caused by disobedience, God is a promising redeemer, right? Before God announces judgment on mankind, he makes a promise of the redeemer that will come and defeat the serpent, and in this way defeat sin and death. So even as he's having this conversation with them, we know.
Yeah.
He's like, we need to separate now, but I'm going to be able to do something, and I'm going to send someone, which is Jesus, to redeem you, and then we're going to be back together.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
That's how much he loves us.
He does.
But yeah, that's just so much drama
wild.
in there.
It's wild.
On to the next one.
So the next one is Moses and the rock. I don't know if this one's as well known, but we do know about Moses. He got the people out of Egypt, went through the desert, the whole 9 yards, but way longer than that. But you know what I mean. So just a little background. So Moses was called by God to get the Israelites out of Egypt, where they had been for like 430 years, like forever. But God let them out. Like he called Moses out and said, "You're gonna lead them out." And he did. They crossed the Red Sea, and their destination is Canaan, because this is the promised land. God's like, you're going to go there. And there's a lot of issues with the people, the Israelites. So
that's an understatement.
Yeah.
But yes.
Like, we won't go into that, because that's a whole other thing that was going on with them.
Yeah, so much.
But I've read in different things about what it should have actually taken them to get across. But basically anywhere from like 4 days to like 11 days. Like, it should not have taken them very long. You know, they're walking. It took them 40 years. Okay, so they had issues. So we won't go into that.
Yeah,
but
that's another story for another day.
That's for another day. But just know
they were just wilding out for 40 years. Yeah.
Moses is here trying to like lead them out, and they're like, you know, doing all this stuff in the desert. So we'll pick up the story here, Numbers 20, verse 7. It says, "And the Lord said to Moses, 'You and Aaron must take the staff and assemble the entire community. As the people watch, speak to the rock over there, and it will pour out its water. You will provide enough water from the rock to satisfy the whole community and their livestock.' So Moses did as he was told. He took the staff from the place where it was kept before the Lord. Then he and Aaron summoned the people to come and gather at the rock. 'Listen, you rebels,' he shouted. 'Must we bring you water from this rock?' Then Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with the staff, and water gushed out. So the entire community and their livestock drank their fill. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 'Because you did not trust me enough to demonstrate my holiness to the people of Israel, you will not lead them into the land I am giving them.'" God gave them very specific instructions during that time, and God doesn't just say things just to say them.
No.
And so at that moment, I can imagine like Moses being, he called them rebels.
Yeah.
He was like, "Hey, you rebels, like this is going to happen." And then God tells him to speak to the rock. He instead hits the rock, and God's like, "That's not what I said.
That's not what I told you
That's not what I told you."
But it's important to say he disobeyed, right?
Yes, he did.
And God still gave him water. You know,
Yeah,
because that's just what God be doing.
Because Moses disobeyed, but they still needed water. So
Yep.
God's like, "I'm still going to give you water, but tisk tisk, like that's not what I said."
How dare you?
So they continue on their journey towards the promised land, to Canaan. But God reminds Moses that he's not going to be able to enter. He tells him, "Because of your disobedience, like you didn't show my holiness to the people of Israel, and kind of like because of your disobedience, this is what's going to happen." And so we find this in Deuteronomy chapter 32. It says, "That same day the Lord said to Moses, 'Go to Moab, to the mountains east of the river, and climb Mount Nebo, which is across from Jericho. Look out across the land of Canaan, the land I am giving to the people of Israel as their own special possession. Then you will die there on the mountain. You will join your ancestors, just as Aaron your brother died on Mount Or, and join his ancestors. For both of you betrayed me with the Israelites at the waters of Meribah, at Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin." Whoa, a lot of names there. "You failed to demonstrate my holiness to the people of Israel there. So you will see the land from a distance, but you may not enter the land I am giving the people of Israel." God still kept his promise, and he still led his people into the promised land. He didn't let Moses enter because of his disobedience.
Right.
But he didn't deprive him of seeing it and seeing the promise fulfilled.
Yeah.
So again, yes, there are consequences. He was disobedient, but God didn't go as far as to
He didn't condemn him.
He didn't condemn him.
Yeah.
He just said, this is the consequence
He
for you
could
not
have he could
obeying.
have just struck him down there.
I
right
mean,
then
like,
and there.
Aaron
But he
died
was like-
before.
But he was like, no. Let me at least show it to you. You know?
Let me show it to you.
Yeah.
Let you see why I'm not letting you in, but I'm
Right.
going to let you see that they are. Like, they're going to go ahead. And so that's what
Right.
God does
And that's
there.
a good picture of course, God's mercy and God's love. But it's also a good picture of how the things that we do, they do have consequences. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are consequences to our actions, and it's important to be obedient because you don't know if you're going to be missing out on your Canaan.
Yeah. You don't know if that one mistake,
Yeah.
that one kind of like, I didn't quite obey there, could, result
Yeah,
in
after you suffer for
a
40
missing.
years with all these miscreants.
Yeah.
All right, so the next one is going to be, we're going to talk about Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac. Abraham is the father of Ishmael and Isaac. And then while I'm reading the story, just so you know, I will refer to them as, because they had different names. So Abraham was Abram, and then Sarah was Sarai. So just, they're the same people, just God changed their names because that's just what he'd be doing. He'd just be changing people's names, okay? All right, so background. Abram received the promise from God many years before. God calls Abram out of his native town and promises to make him a great nation and that he would bless him. Abram wasn't sure about what God meant because he had no children, but the Lord reassures him in Genesis chapter 15. So the verse is, then the Lord said to him, no, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. Abram and God have some conversations about what this all means, but ultimately God is like, I got you, and you will see my blessings. Like, don't worry about it. I got you. I already made you the promise, so just hold on to that promise, right? So the Bible doesn't specifically say, it doesn't specify how much time passes, but it does say that Sarai, Abram's wife, she hasn't been able to bear children, and suggests to, she has this really great idea, and she goes, hey, husband, since God has prevented me from having babies, right? I think you should sleep with your servant Hagar, right? And you can have babies that way.
Right.
Because
let's help God. Let's help God.
We get impatient, right? And he's like, okay, he made us this promise, but it hasn't come to pass. So let me just take it into my own hands and it'll work out. It doesn't. So
spoiler.
Yeah, Abram is like, oh, okay, yeah. No. You don't have to twist my arm. Yeah, no, this is a great idea, especially if your wife is telling you to do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you both want kids, so it's just like, yeah, this is a great idea.
Sounds like a great alternative.
This is a great idea. Yeah, so he agrees with her, and he gets Hagar pregnant. But shocker, of course, Hagar began to treat Sarai with contempt. Right? She was being disrespectful because she had this baby now. So
I'm sure she knew the promise, so she's like, I did it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, God chose me to have his kid instead of you. That's not true. Yeah, so, of course, Sarai blames Abram and basically is like, this is all your fault, right? Housewives of Canaan edition. There's so much drama. And
I just imagine like Sarai being like, "This is your fault."
Yeah, throwing plates and things.
Yeah, like flipping over the table, like just pissed.
Like Housewives of New Jersey.
And he's like, "No, this isn't my fault."
Yes, yeah. And Abram is like, "Nah, this is your responsibility to handle, right?" Because Sarai was the one that told him that he should sleep with Hagar. Yeah. So Sarai starts being mean to Hagar, and Hagar runs away. So while she's running away, God stops her and promises her that Ishmael, which is her son with Abram, will also have many descendants. Right? So the Bible says, then he added, I will give you more descendants than you can count. So she goes back, she meaning Hagar. So she goes back and has a son for Abram, and God fulfills the promise. So now Abram and Hagar have Ishmael, and Sarai still doesn't have a child. Right. So just something to note, it's not until 13 years that Sarai is actually pregnant, right? Abram is pushing 100 years old, right? Because this is just what happened. He was 100, and the Lord appears to him again and tells him to serve him faithfully, and he will guarantee him countless descendants. He changes his name and then calls him the father of all nations, right? So he goes from being Abram to being Abraham. The Bible says, I will make a covenant with you by which I will guarantee to give you countless descendants. At this, Abram fell face down on the ground. Then God said to him, This is my covenant with you. I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. He promises a lot of other stuff, right? Because that's just what God does. He promises a lot of other stuff and reassures him that he will be with Abraham and the son Sarah will have, right? So he will be with this son that hasn't been born yet.
Right.
Bible says, the Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised, because God is good. She became pregnant and she gave birth to a son of Abraham in his old age. This happened at just the time God had said it would.
Like, it was going to happen.
It was so,
they were just getting all anxious.
That verse right there. This happened at just the time God had said it would. Of course it did.
Of course.
But we're so impatient.
Yeah.
And then the last verse says, and Abraham named his son Isaac.
Right.
So God had a plan for Abraham and Sarah, and just like he has a plan for us, they disobeyed and did things thinking that they were helping God, or, they got impatient and they were trying to do it themselves. But sometimes we do think that we're helping God, and he don't need no help.
No, he's got it. But we think we're smart.
Merely the creator of the universe. He doesn't need our help. He doesn't need our help. And we're probably just going to mess it up anyway. So basically, Ishmael was a result of that. It was a result of us humans trying to help God with what he's promised us, right? And that's in Ishmael. And although they disobeyed, God blessed Ishmael and gave him many descendants as well, because let's be honest, it wasn't Ishmael's fault, it was the parents. But initially there was only supposed to be Isaac, son of Sarah, and Abraham, but of course it changed things. And if you know the story, you know why it was so important for Sarah to be the one to have the child, because from that son would be the lineage of where the Messiah would come from.
Right.
So we can see it here again that God is not condemning them. Even though they disobeyed, he blessed them, because after they messed up, they came back and trusted God and waited on him and his time. So we can see it here that God is not condemning them. He blesses them because after they messed up, they came back and trusted God again and waited on him and his time. So it's all about, we're going to mess up. It's just always going to happen. Of course, we do our best not to, but when we do, all we have to do is just come back to God and then just try to be obedient the next time.
Right.
Yeah. Just got to keep on trying.
Okay, so the next section we're going to talk about is generational blessings. And this one is about David and his son Solomon. A little backstory. Solomon is the son of David and Bathsheba. And Bathsheba was another man's wife. And David was like, I'm the king and I like you. So he was like, I'm going to get with her. And so her husband Uriah was out in battle, and King David, got her pregnant.
Right.
And so David's like, what do I do? I'm going to kill him. So he starts scheming about it, sets out to kill him. And so as a result of all this, Solomon is born.
Right.
And
as a result of all this drama.
Yeah, all this drama, all this craziness. But actually Solomon is born, and Solomon is actually known in the Bible as the wisest man to ever live. So we jump into 1 Kings chapter 3, and it says, that night the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, what do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you. Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am like a little child who doesn't know his way around. And here I am in the midst of your own chosen people, a nation so great and numerous they cannot be counted. Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom. So God replied, because you have asked for wisdom in governing my people with justice and have not asked for a long life or wealth or the death of your enemies, I will give you what you asked for. I will give you a wise and understanding heart, such as no one else has had or ever will have. And I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches and fame. No other king in all the world will be compared to you for the rest of your life. So how powerful is that?
Crazy.
Like, you're coming from a situation that was just very chaotic. And if you know the kind of the backstory of David, like, he comes back and pleads for forgiveness and comes back to God. And he's also a great psalmist and does all these amazing things. And because of that, because kind of David restores his relationship with God, then now here's Solomon kind of taking on, being his son. And we see this change, and it's not he doesn't come to God like God's like, what do you want, what do you need? And I think as humans we tend to be very selfish, right? We're wanting things that will benefit just us.
Right.
And so,
and that makes sense in this context because he's the son of a king.
Right.
So you
right.
would think that he wants chariots and power and
he's
land
probably
and
used to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I want all of that still. I still want to live in comfort and riches and fame and all that. But he also sees kind of the responsibility that he has, and he's like, I need something more than money. Like, money's not going to help me. I need to be able to govern, and so give me wisdom. And so because of this, kind of like coming from like a righteous heart, God grants him that. And just how awesome God is, that him asking for the wisdom, God sees that he's being real about it. And not only does he give him that, but he ends up giving him also the riches and fame that most people would have only asked for.
Yeah.
And he would have missed out on having all these, the wisdom of it. And just like he says, he calls him like, no one has been like you before. Mm-hmm. No one like you will be. And so what a blessing it's coming from. And again, this is also from the lineage of Jesus later on.
Yeah.
So
I think
we see that blessing.
Cool because I don't think it necessarily is pointing out that we should be like asking for things that you're like, oh, I don't want money, I only want wisdom, or it doesn't mean it, I don't think that's what it's saying, but no. I think what it's saying is that, or what it's showing us is that it's what he wanted, right? So he told God the truth and he asked for what he truly wanted, but I think it was his heart posture also.
Yes.
Because it was a thing where I'm asking for wisdom, but I'm not asking for wisdom because it's what I think I should do or what I think you want me to say, but it's because what I truly want. And of course God can see your heart. So he's like, oh, okay, you're being honest with me. You're communicating with me. And because you have that relationship with me and you're communicating with me in this way, I'm also going to give you all this other stuff. Right. So it's not that we have to be, we can just tell God anything, but we don't have to like pretend to be meek and humble when that's not, if you need money, ask God for money.
Right.
But just do everything out of a healthy heart posture. Right.
Right.
And
not
just
trying to be,
don't pretend to be something else.
Like don't be, what's the word I'm trying to say? Like wanting things out of selfishness or greed. That's what I was trying to say.
Yes.
Like trying to be greedy, trying to want more than like the person next to you or the person before you. Like,
right. Or like want it for the wrong reasons as well.
Or for the wrong reasons. Yeah.
You're like, I want all this money because I want to buy a Tesla, and that's great and all, but
or I want to shock my friends that I have money and they don't, and it's like, that's probably not the good way to.
Yeah, that one's probably not going to go well. Yeah. All right. So the next story that we have is going to be the story of Ruth and Boaz, and these two people are actually part of the lineage of Jesus as well. So a little bit of background: Ruth was a Moabite woman. And she was married to one of the two sons of Naomi, who was a Jewish woman living in Moab. Because her family and her escaped there from Judea due to a severe famine. So Naomi's husband dies. Naomi is the mother-in-law. So Naomi's husband dies, and then both her sons die as well. So they are all left widows. So now we go from having a family, basically, to just having 3 women living alone because all of their husbands died, right? So Naomi decides to go back to her hometown and tells both of her daughter-in-laws, hey, listen, I'm going to go back to my hometown, right? Because now I'm alone, so I'm going to go back to my family. I think you guys should also go back to your families.
Right.
And then the other daughter-in-law, she leaves, but Ruth is like, nah, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going with you. Mm-hmm. So reluctantly, Naomi lets Ruth go with her because she didn't really want her to come.
No.
And I don't think it's because she didn't want to deal with her. I just think it's because, like, what am I going to help you with? You know what I mean? Yeah.
The scripture was like, I can't offer you, like, I can't have more kids for you to get married, which is kind of like her idea. Like, why would you want to come
like,
with
how
me?
am I going to take care of you sort of thing?
I can't offer you anything kind of thing.
And then all of this, again, is from the book of Ruth. Again, short book, read it when you can. So the Bible says, but Ruth replied, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us.
She was serious.
That's so good. That's so good. That's crazy. Especially when you don't have really much context for Ruth, and you're like, wow, she was really, she was in it to win it.
She was loyal. Like, she was, I'm sticking around.
Ruth was her ride or die. So Ruth says, no, I'm not leaving you, so just deal with it. All right, so at this point, they got to Naomi's hometown, And they got to get to work, right? Because then now they need to eat. Now they need a home. Now they need all these things. They got to put food on the table, right? So the Bible says, one day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it. Naomi replied, all right, my daughter, go ahead. So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened, she found herself working in a little field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. That's a name, Elimelech. So she is working in Boaz's field, and Boaz just pulls up on his horse, on his stallion, and he goes, hey, who is that? Who is that? So he starts handling his business, and he tries to figure out how he can marry her, right? And mind you, it doesn't happen this quickly. We're just trying to take you through the story, okay? Yeah. There's a lot more. There's details, but you can read that on your own. So
he was interested.
He was interested. He's trying to figure out how to do it. And then Bible says, then Boaz said to the elders and to the crowd standing around, you are witnesses that today I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. And with the land,
the sons and the husband.
Yeah, the three guys that died in the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
And with the land, I have acquired Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, to be my wife. This way, she can have a son to carry on the family name of her dead husband and to inherit the family property here in his hometown. You are all witnesses today. So they get married, right? He handles his business. They get married, and they have a son, and his name is Obed. And Bible says, so Boaz took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. So what's amazing about the story, other than the entire story, is that these people are part of the lineage of Jesus, right? So their obedience led to the birth of the Messiah. And we'll read you the lineage here. You might not know who some of the people are, but basically, we'll get there.
Yeah.
So Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Who are we talking about now? Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David.
And it just goes on and on and on until we get to
Jesus. So that's an amazing story.
Yeah.
It's such a nice story.
It is. It's really nice.
It really works out for everyone. It's a gem.
To read it. It's short. It has a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, and on to our final example of generational blessings.
Okay, so our final one is the widow with jars of oil. So this woman, who we don't know her name, but she comes to the prophet Elisha and tells him that her husband died, and because of her death, they might take her sons to make them slaves. 2 Kings, where it says, what can I do to help you? Elisha asks her. Tell me, what do you have in the house? And so she says, nothing at all except a flask of olive oil. So Elijah replies, borrow as many empty jars as you can from your friends and neighbors. Then go into the house with your sons and shut the door behind you. Pour olive oil from your flask into the jars, setting each one aside when it is filled. So then the woman, she does as she was told. Her sons keep bringing her jars, and she fills one after another. Soon, every container was full to the brim. Bring me another jar, she said to one of her sons. There aren't any more, he told her, and then the olive oil stopped flowing. When she told the man of God what had happened, he said to her, now sell the olive oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on what is left over. So I think what's important here is it's a short story. It's a pretty simple story. But basically this woman is kind of left with nothing, basically. And she's desperate to leave something for her sons. She doesn't want them to be taken off. She doesn't want them to have to suffer. So she's trying to find a solution. She goes to the prophet, and he gives her this solution. And so what she can do now with the oil after she does all this is now she can sell that oil and have money. And so therefore she's kept her kids, her sons, from being taken. And she can now bless them so they can have a good life versus being held captive.
Yeah, and this is a good example of obedience as well, because it says that Elisha told her what to do, and she did what she was told. Like,
Yeah.
she didn't question it. She didn't say, okay, but how is this going to happen? She literally just sent her boys to just go take everybody's jars.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're about to do this, right? And I think the oil as well, it kind of symbolizes that generational blessing, right? Because
Yes,
it just
absolutely.
kept pouring and pouring and pouring and pouring. And we've talked about this before, but the oil only stopped pouring because she didn't have any more jars, right?
Right.
It would have kept going. So
Right.
now they had enough money not only to pay their bills, but to
Be able to
potentially,
live,
yeah,
further
potentially
on.
set up the children with, I don't know, horses, chickens,
Carriages.
whatever it is that they need to buy at that time. So it's very simple, but it's a beautiful picture of like, listen, you just got to be ready for what God has. You have to be prepared for what you're asking God for. But once he starts pouring, you just, it's
Right.
just bountiful.
Yeah. And just how God can just keep pouring into us. Really, we can refer it to our lives, just if we're willing, like
Yeah.
if we're open about it. Like, here are all these jars. She was able to pour this oil, and it just kept running. In the same way in our lives, like if we continue to like ask God and open ourselves for him to bless us and bless those around us, and they're also willing, that's how you keep the blessings going.
Right. Yeah. We just have to be that vessel. And that's where it comes from, where basically you just have to empty yourself out so he can fill you, right? Because if you're already full, then the blessing is going to stop pouring, because he's like, okay, he will leave you wherever you think you're comfortable with. You know what I mean?
He's not going to force on you.
He's not going to. He's a gentleman, right? He's not
Yes.
going to knock down. He knocks on the door, but he's not going to barge
He's not gonna-
in.
yeah,
You
he's
have
like,
to invite
"Let
him
me
in.
in!"
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a lovely, lovely gentleman. So, we just have to not only prepare, but also be able to have enough space to receive the blessing and to receive what he wants to give us. So that's just something to keep in mind. But
And don't like limit that God can do that. Like, don't put like kind of like that. Like, no, I'm good. Like, don't limit that, because she could have easily said like, oh, I only have this, and like I'm gonna save it to make the last of my bread or
Right.
whatever. She realized like, yes, this is all I have, but what can I do with it? Like, she was willing to give that up in order to see what she was able to provide, to like be obedient with the little that she had.
yeah, and this is a good example of, because we were talking about this recently, and it's a good example about the tithe, right? Because it's like, you don't necessarily, just because you think your 10% isn't enough, that's not the case. It's not about the amount, right? It's
Right.
about taking the little that you have, whatever it is that you have, and giving it to God, and then
trusting.
watch him, trusting that he's going to bless you and multiply whatever it is that you're giving, because you're being obedient to him.
Right. Bless
and
the
as-
90%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about today, you can see how obedience leads to generational blessings, right? So
Right.
our obedience, like Yadi and I don't have kids, right? But our obedience, if we do have children, it will bleed into them and into their generation, right? Because it just protects them and covers them.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
it's also
something-
like our circle of influence. Just because we don't have children, if we have them or not, like we still have people who, even though not biologically, they're related to us or whatever.
They didn't come from the womb.
Yeah. But it can still be a blessing as like a spiritual, blessing, like they're spiritually connected kind of thing, and spiritual generational blessing.
Yeah. Like,
to
you don't
others.
know your obedience, my obedience, it doesn't only impact me. You know what I
Right.
mean? It impacts the people that are around you, and that's so powerful, and it's so important for you to consider that when you have to make a decision, or where you have to make a decision between obedience and disobedience.
Right.
Because it doesn't only affect you. Like, it's important, and there are, like Yadi said, there are people connected to you, and it will affect them as well. So just keep that in mind. Not to put any pressure on you, but it's important.
No, but keep it in mind.
Yeah. So we hope that was helpful for you. We hope you enjoyed that. We read the Bible to you. You didn't have to read it yourself, but hopefully this will entice you to at least read Esther, because Esther is dramatic.
Yeah.
Or the beautiful romance of Ruth and
Boaz.
Yeah. Like the soft melodies of Ruth and Boaz, which is a beautiful love story.
So nice.
Yeah. So we hope you enjoyed that. And then we just want to land this plane. So the closing thought that we have for you today is that God is not behind in prayer requests. We are just behind in obedience. That's crazy.
That's good.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we're parting from the premise that God can't open the door so you can step into your next if you're behind in obeying the things that he's already told you to do. So if God told me to do something and I haven't done it, then I can't complain that he hasn't opened the door for me to step into my next, or for me to go into my next season, when he's like, I told you to do something 6 months ago, so if you would do that, then you can step into your next. So I think that's just something that, like, if you maybe feel stuck in a season, or if you feel like you don't have much traction and you're not moving, maybe ask God, talk to your Father and just ask him to reveal it to you, because maybe you just don't know that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing,
right?
And that's fair too, because sometimes we're fully oblivious.
Yeah.
But just ask him, ask God to reveal anything to you. You're like, God, if there's something that you want me to do and I'm not doing it, please reveal it to me, because he's your Father and he'll show you. He might not show you today, he might not show you tomorrow, but he'll show you. So just be ready for him to show you when you ask him. But sometimes we're just kind of stuck in a season and we don't know why, but it's because he told us he might have told you to do something and you haven't done it.
And so just do it like a self-check. Like, am I still doing the things I was supposed to? Am I still, doing my like Christian practices, my discipline, my devotional, that kind of stuff. Because sometimes, because we don't hear from God, we think like, oh, I can kind of let that lag, right? Or let those go. Like, no, I think it's with any relationship, but obviously especially with God, like, you want to keep it going. So don't forget that. Like, sometimes we get a little like, oh, we haven't heard from him in a while. Yeah. Yep. So we get a little complacent and we're like, oh, everything's fine, kind of, quote unquote, and so we kind of lag there. So just being mindful, like checking ourselves.
Yeah, and I think even if you feel content, right, in the space that you are, because we are supposed to feel content. You're not supposed to feel sad all the time or happy all the time. Right. You can be a little happy medium. It's okay. It's okay, yeah. But sometimes I feel like maybe just maybe you're doing good in your disciplines, but like maybe having extra conversations with God and just asking him to reveal things to you, because sometimes we get stuck in praying the same way, you know what I mean, or going through your routine of prayer,
like a habit,
going through your prayer list or whatever. And I'm guilty of that, but sometimes it's just good to ask that extra question and be like, hey God, if I'm not doing something that you want me to do, please correct me.
Right.
I got this revelation the other day that sometimes I'm afraid to step into things or like to do things because I don't want to be outside of God's will. But I also have to trust that because he's my Father and I trust him, I have to trust that he's going to correct me if I'm doing something wrong.
Right. You step out in faith. Yeah. And if it's not the right step you were supposed to, you're connected enough and that you can feel like, okay, this was not the right step. Yeah. Let me either take a step back again, or let me take a left, take a right.
Exactly. So I have to step out in faith because, okay, I think this is what I'm supposed to do, but I also have to believe that, okay, if I'm not supposed to do this, I know he's going to correct me in his most loving, gentle way. Yes. And he's going to tell me, like, yo, this is not where you need to be.
Let's move it.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to shoo me to the other side. So that's just something to keep in mind, and we wanted to share it with you, and we hope this episode provided some value to you. We hope you enjoyed it. And as always, this is Fran.
This is Yadi.
We are the Midtown Misfits, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Peace.